Hi, this is Linda Crowder at Russell Specialty Books and Gifts, and we are here for another of our virtual author event series during the COVID-19 virus. I have historian Roger Ringer here with me today. Roger, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, hi, I'm Roger Ringer, and I write books
And a whole lot more.
and a whole lot more.
And a whole lot more. So I want to start with your writing. What have you always been a writer? Have you always had a fascination for writing?
Well, I started doing a little bit of freelance newspaper work when I was on the fire department in Sedgwick County, and did a column in the local newspaper there for a while. And I did some freelance work for a farm paper down in the southeast corner of the state, and did quite a few things for them for a long time, and until they forgot to send me paychecks, and then I
Uh-oh.
would forget. Then I would forget to send them articles. So, but I have done so many things in my life, and I was into cowboy poetry. My first book actually is a book of country and cowboy poetry, and I started writing some manuscripts for a couple of different types of books, and had a very bad experience with the publishing world, and just turned away from that for a while. Have so many things on my plate that uh, it was just, you have a bad experience, you just move on and do something else. And my health started to fail, and I needed something to keep me busy and keep me from sitting around feeling sorry for myself. And I've always been a historian. I've been fascinated with the Old West as well as the state that I'm native to, Kansas. And I was very active in rural causes, rural tourism, rural development, small town rural issues. And I went to a lot of meetings sponsored by the Kansas Sampler Foundation and other groups. And so got to know people from all over the state. And people knew that I was a storyteller. And I would go to a meeting, and there would be uh, times between lectures that people would come up to me and say, "I'll bet you didn't know this about our hometown," or I'll bet you didn't know this character in our history." And a lot of times I had not heard of them. And so as I was trying to figure out what to do, the thing that I'm best suited for with my health issues at this time is to sit and work at the computer. And believe me, they drug me kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I started out writing with a number 2 pencil on a legal pad,
Oh my gosh.
and uh, I got back to an electric typewriter finally. And I was never good with the word processors at all. I never understood them. And but my palsy in my hand makes it where you can't read my writing. So I had to move to the computer, and I take care of everything for the bed and breakfast here our family owns. And so I'm as a techno idiot as I am, I'm the IT person here. So uh, I started thinking about all these stories that I've been told for so long, and I worked at Old Cowtown Museum for a couple of years, and we had visitors from all over the world, and it was fun to tell the stories of early Kansas, but it was also as much fun and sometimes frustrating to dispel the myths. The the movies and the novels have blown so much of our history totally out of proportion, and people thought they were coming to Wichita and they knew all about their Western history, and they started about talking about Wyatt Earp.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, yeah, but you do know that he got kicked off of the police department in Wichita, and because he was on the wrong side of politics and didn't have a real sterling reputation here, and went on to Dodge City and began his walk to fame from there. And people were really kind of disappointed finding out that they didn't know the real stories of everything. And but it was fun being able to visit with people from all over the world. Uh, Old Cowtown Museum is one of the finest museums in the country, and I traveled down to the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City with a couple other people from the museum to do some research in their archives, and their oh, I'm trying to remember his title. There's so many titles in museums, you
There
know.
are, yeah. The
I
curator,
guess
maybe?
I think technically he was a curator, and but there are seven major Western music, or I'm sorry, Western history museums in the United States, and they all have a loose affiliation with each other, and they market each other together, and they share information with each other, and they're the preeminent. The Cowboy Hall of Fame is one. The Buffalo Bill Historical Center is one. The Autry Museum in California is another
Mhm.
one. And he told us that Cowtown didn't even know what all they had, and they should actually be the eighth member of that little group. And so it was fun working there. We had so many things going on there, and uh, we really had a sterling group of interpreters that really knew their business. You can take a college kid and stick him into a house and give him a little script of what he's supposed to tell people about it. But when you get to visiting with people more in depth, you have to know your subject. And that was one of the premier groups working at that time in that museum. And they have some great people there yet today and some real characters, because to portray uh, the Old West and portray the early days of Kansas, you have to be a bit of a character.
Yes, you do.
Yes, and so I thoroughly enjoyed my years there, and I started noticing that uh, there were little stories just popped up out of nowhere. I would go and start researching a particular story, and all of a sudden there'd be something off to the side that was a totally different, a completely different subject, but it caught my eye. And the more I researched, the more these same things started popping up, and so my list just kept growing of subjects to do research on. And when I finished my first manuscript, uh, the publisher wants a total of 50,000 words in a book, and I had 120,000 in my first manuscript.
Oh my.
So actually, the first two books and the third book are all stories roughly from that original manuscript. It's had to been broken up into 40 and 50,000 word chunks
Now I
in order
have
to.
two of them in the store. I'm not sure which one came first.
Kansas Oddities.
Okay, so this is Kansas Oddities right there.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you decided what would go in Kansas Oddities.
Well, I took that original manuscript and I had the editor there rate stories that caught their attention, and then mark. And she got about halfway through it, and then just said, let's stop here because there's so much material already. And I don't follow a timeline. I don't follow a subject line. I follow stories that interest me,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes from the very early days of Kansas up until roughly the 1970s, and there's a few of the companies that I talk about that are still in business today. A lot of them have been bought out and are international concerns now. But I just try to keep it interesting reading. You can sit down and read one or two stories and put the book down and come back anytime. That's what attracted the publisher to my books. They said today's attention spans, since everybody goes around looking at their phones all the time,
Mm-hmm.
has become very limited, and people don't like to sit down and read long, drawn out books. And a lot of my subjects deserve to have a full book written about, but these are all subjects that have very limited uh, uh, material on, and I have to cite every source because I'm not wanting to tell a wild tale. I'm trying to document the truth of the matter of each one of these stories. And these are stories that fall through the cracks of the regular history books. Uh, People, even in their own family, sometimes have forgotten about them or didn't know about them in the first place. And I have kept a lot of city clerks and librarians and museum people scrambling, trying to dig out information when I call them for it. And a lot of the time, it surprised them. They just did not know what they had in their own history. And so I've had people that would sit down and just read straight through the book because they loved it. I have people that would do two or three stories at a time, set it down, come back. It fits into every demographic. Uh, Everybody can find something in there that interests them. And a lot of it is very surprising. And Kansas, has had an inferiority complex since about 1913, about the time that there was a depression that really set. Before that time, Kansas was a boomer state. It was being advertised as a tropical climate and a wonderful place to be. And after about 1913, we just kind of lost our collective optimism. And Kansas, we're the number seventh most on the list of states that people are leaving. And yet, people that I find that are more excited about Kansas and can look through the old process of, well, you know, native Kansans ask somebody that moved into the state, and I was guilty of this at one time. It says, how in the world did you end up in Kansas? And those
I get
people,
that question all the time. We just moved here, and everybody kept asking me, "Oh my gosh, why Russell? You moved to Russell?" So yeah, and people who had lived here for generations. So I thought that was
yeah,
sad because Kansas is really nice, and you talk about it being a garden state, and it really was. I mean, when you're used to 35 below and 60-mile-an-hour sustained winds from Wyoming, Kansas is really nice.
well, yeah, but we're Wyoming only beats us on the average wind speed by about 3/10 of a mile per hour. But and
That
if you live
surprises me because it does not feel nearly as windy here.
well south of Casper, is a real miserable place to live for 9 months out of the year. There
Which
are
is
places
exactly
in
where I
Wyoming.
lived.
If you'd have lived up in along the Bighorn Range, actually it's nicer living in the wintertime up there than it is down in the south part.
I believe you.
But but I can't tell you the story of the Kansan that moved to Wyoming that I had a conversation with in a grocery store up there, and but she was very happy to be out of Kansas. But she moved to Sheridan, Wyoming from St. Francis.
Well,
So
Sheridan's gorgeous. I
it's
don't know
kind
about
of
St. Francis.
St. Francis. It's a neat part of the country, but it can be very trying to live out there. That's where they get a lot of the blizzards and winds
Oh, no.
up in that part of the state. So, but I would keep talking to people and getting these stories and getting these stories. And I thought one day I've got to start writing them down. And I started putting together the research, and I'm kind of limited where, but the computer and my phone are my major parts of my research, but I do have a library of over 700 volumes. So I can't physically get out and go around to all the places that I like to go to. And by the way, I love your radio station at Russell.
We do have a
Uh,
great radio at KRSL.
it's great. It's fantastic. I would whenever I would go north and to go to Lucas to get my Lucas bologna fix, I would
Oh,
listen
yes.
to the station at Russell, and I loved the on the AM side. I love the noon show that was on that they got the report from the hospital on who was in the hospital, and they played polka music for that hour. And I love polka music, but you don't get it in the south half of Kansas. Kansas is
We,
still
we
pretty
have a very large
regionalized.
German population here in Russell County.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm mostly German too, but down in this part of the country, you just don't hear polka music. And so I love when I'm up that way. I was working on a project at Channel 9 up there, the public television station. So I would listen to Russell Radio when I would go that way.
Nice.
Uh, but there's so many interesting. I have some stories that I have been digging on for years, trying to find the credible information to be able to reference to, and there are some stories that there's just simply not enough out there that I can actually write a story on. Probably the one story, and it's in the Eccentric Kansas book that
Let me hold
I
that one
did.
up. This is Eccentric Kansas.
Hmm.
Here we go.
The one story that would probably be termed as fiction, but it is a local legend, is Sinkhole Sam at Inman. And I have friends that live at Buhler, just south of Inman, and of course Marcy Penner and the Kansas Sampler is south of Inman, and the great sinkhole where Sinkhole Sam was supposed to be spotted back in the 50s is just a section north of where Marcy Penner lives.
Okay, so
So
again, I'm not native Kansan. What exactly is Sinkhole Sam?
Sinkhole Sam is a Furfenkugel,
A what?
and a Furfenkugel.
Okay.
It is the most extinctest creature on Earth, except it doesn't know it's extinct.
Oh, how funny.
And they had sightings of it in the 50s, and they say that it comes up and looks around every so many decades to see if mankind has improved any. And then, since they have been disappointed every time, then they go back down in the sinkhole and don't show up again for many, many decades. So It's a very fun story, and
It does sound like it. And that's in the Eccentric?
I believe that's in the Eccentric. And I have so many stories that run through my mind, and I've got files and files, and I have a book here. Let me turn around and grab it real quick. I have pages upon pages of story ideas, and I add a story idea to it, at least one every day. I'll run across a interesting person. I'll run, sometimes two or three of them will end up on here. These are all future projects that I have not had time to do the research on, and all just as fascinating as the stories that I've actually gotten written. And I've
Tell
got a
people you're
follow.
not really a writer until you have notebooks full of story ideas laying around.
That's true, very true, and as well as a lot of rejection slips to put on your wall.
Yes,
And
people think that they could just wallpaper their house with them. Yes.
yeah, yeah, and also uh, when the first book came out, they immediately Amazon had used copies available, and I'm called to the editor, and I says, "Hey, they're saying that just a second. Old firefighter has to have a scanner on all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, we just got the books out new. Nobody had a chance to have any used ones, and yet used ones were showing up on Amazon." And I says, "What's the deal with that?" And she says, "We are in a very strange business." I go, "No kidding." In fact, I found the other day that I could order a hardback copy of my book, but I've never seen a hardback copy of my book. I didn't know that was available in hardback copy, and I've just about ordered one just to see if it actually exists.
Oh, don't do
Uh,
that. Because
but
Amazon is an odd marketplace. And I am a writer and I have a lot of writer friends. And we compare notes on this because some people will say, hey, they've got one of my used books for like $800.
uh-huh,
And what we've all decided is this is just like sellers that are, I don't know, in India or China or, I don't know where. And they're just basically stealing your money and they're not going to provide you with a product. So
yeah,
they'll call it, here's a used book and it's really cheap. And what they're doing is getting your email information so that they can send you other stuff. So it's,
yeah,
yeah, Amazon has a lot of strengths, but people have to be wary there.
yeah. It's a just, but the besides that, even the publishing is a very strange business. I am very fortunate. I am not. I had an English teacher who did wonders for me in school, and I did not actually get training as far as being an author. And I have the fortune of having a good friend at Lawrence who has edited dozens of books for professors and things. She works up for the Geological Survey in Lawrence, and she has done book work for authors for a long time. And she's the one that keeps me straight, because when they send me a question back from the author, I go, huh? And I just say, copy Mary in and let her answer the questions for you. But they told me one time they didn't like the way that I put all of my references, and they said they wanted the Chicago style.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the Chicago style was a Tommy gun and a violin case.
No,
I
that's
call
probably the most popular nonfiction style book out there.
well, I called Mary and I said, "Hey, I don't know what the Chicago style for that is." She says, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." So I have a great asset in a great personal editor that can stand between me and the editor at the publishing company. So that has helped me out. I am sure there's a lot of people when you try to do a book that is full of facts, uh, it's a whole different style of writing than fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Fiction, you can just basically just make up things as you go. And I am trying to write a fiction book at the moment, and it's a totally different animal. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a entirely different style. So while I'm waiting on my next book to come out from history, uh, I'm working on that. And but
Now, is it historical fiction?
no, it's just truly fiction. It's actually borrowing from my experiences in the music business. Did cowboy poetry and was a Western vocalist, and I have a lot of friends in the Western music business. And you'll notice this. I say Western. That is not country. Western was divorced from country a long time ago, and there's an entire industry of fine musicians in the Western industry. Some of our top names are Riders in the Sky
Mm-hmm.
and uh,
Sons of the
uh,
Pioneers.
Sons of the Pioneers, Asleep at the Wheel, Dusty Rogers, Roy
Mm-hmm.
Rogers Jr., and the man that does Dusty Rogers and Rex Allen Jr.'s recording. The studio is in Towanda, Kansas, and he's one of my best friends. And he produced my CD album. And so I'm borrowing from. I had my mother run through what I had so far of the book just to see if it was worth continuing on with. And she says, there's an awful lot of familiar things in that book and a lot of people that I can think of right offhand. I says, yeah, it's just kind of a composite of a lot of people that I know and even a few of my own experiences. So it's fiction, but it's based on a lot of real life experiences, and we'll see how that turns out. It's not the type of book that History Press will be interested in, so we'll see who wants to try it when I'm done. And
Yeah,
but
first, you have to
it keep
finish writing the book, then you can worry about how to get it out there.
That's right. That's right. I had done a how-to book back before the turn of the century.
That
In
sounds
the
like such a long
19th,
time ago now.
doesn't it though? It just when I say turn of the century, normally I'm talking about from the 19th to 20th
That's
century.
where my mind goes first.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But before uh, 2000, I did a manuscript and uh, put together by hand the old fashioned way with a copy machine and put together the basic manuscripts, a book called 21st Century Homesteading. And it was a how to book for people from the city who wanted to move to the country and be more self sufficient and enjoy the lifestyle. And it's amazing. I was a township trustee for a while, and it's amazing how many people move from the city and expect to have everything in the country that they had in the city. And I would have people complain to me about how rough and dusty their roads were. I says, "Oh, really? Would you like me to pave it? And how about throwing in a fire hydrant and maybe a fire station on the corner?" They go, "Oh, that would be wonderful." I says, "Yeah, move back to town." So I sent that to 5 different publishing companies who dealt in subject matter similar to that, and got the rejection slips from all 5 of them. And within a year, on their list, all 5 of them had a book that was very similar to that manuscript I sent to them in the first place. So I was
Probably already
very,
had it in the works if it was a year later, because that's a long, it takes a good 2 years between accepting and hitting the newsstands.
not when you have a copy of my manuscript on hand. It's amazing how fast they can do things when they really want to. So I was very discouraged, and it really took my schedule being freed up to be able to come back to writing, because I physically can't do a lot of the things that I used to do, and it's
Now
very
you're working
irritating.
with Arcadia. I'm hoping that they're good people.
I I've had my moments with them, but they do a wonderful job. Their quality is absolutely excellent. I've been delighted with their cover art. Uh, I had three different editors on the first book. The names seem to change there for a while, quite a bit, and it's like you're starting over with each editor. So I had some problems on the first book with them. The second book, we got along a little bit better. My only uh, irritation on that one was that we lost most of the marketing year by it coming out in the first part of November last year. And so all of the functions that I used to go to do book signings and promotions was already passed. So the marketing of Eccentric Kansas has been a lot different than the Kansas Oddities, but they do get the books in some amazing places. The book is in stores and in places that I had no idea would ever want a book about story. There are books stores in Connecticut and Virginia and North Carolina that have Kansas Oddities on their shelves,
Nice.
and and there's the it's a very strange business because there are distributors that buy from them and then they put it out. So I get a fairly decent list on where everything is placed, but it's way beyond what I ever imagined they would go with it. So uh, they are a good company, and it's just, well, and also authors are a bit eccentric and a little hard to work with, and I'm no different. I'm no different. So
Now you said that there was another one coming out, a history.
yeah, yes, I just sent the manuscript in last month for True Tales of Kansas, and it's basically third in my series. They don't like to know that it's a series. They want to promote each book individually, but
Well,
actually the
people like
third.
them to be standalone because that way second and three don't sell if they haven't read one, if it's a series.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, just between you and me, True Tales of Kansas is third in the series. It's more stories about interesting people and interesting subjects. And I don't hold all the stories to be feel good stories. There is tragedy, there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. The I've got the story of the guy that basically blew up Iola, their own personal mad bomber.
Oh my.
Uh, one of the first actual mass murder incident in the country, uh, outside of killing Indians, was in Winfield, Kansas, and uh, the new book, True Tales of Kansas, I had to real quick uh, do the research, and the first story in the book is not a story I already had pre-done. I ran across this story and it was so compelling that I had to get it into the manuscript. And it's about a fire in a sod dugout up close to Norton, Kansas, in that general vicinity up there. And it's a heartbreaking story. Uh, the mother and father had loaded up 2 wagon loads of corn to take to Smith Center to sell, and so their 14-year-old daughter was left in charge of the other kids, and there was an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the stove went out in the dugout, and so the kids thought that they would rekindle the fire. Well, the younger girl took a cup of kerosene
Oh no.
and pitched it onto the ashes,
Oh
and
no.
it exploded. And the 14-year-old girl was right next to the youngest boy and grabbed him and took him out by the windmill and in a tub put out the fire on him and laid him out on the ground, went back in the house, and in 2 different trips pulled out the other 2 girls that were there and rolled them on the ground, got the fire put out on them. It basically burnt the clothing off of them. The girl that had pitched the kerosene into the stove, her eyeballs were burnt completely out of her head.
Oh my gosh.
And she took them and put all the kids in the barn and covered them up. And she had all of her clothes burnt off of her, and her skin was literally dripping off of her. And she started for the neighbors, and a little over a mile away, the neighbor boy was in the field shucking corn, and he helped her, loaded her in the wagon, took her to their place, and then they headed back to try and help the other girls. And she not only got the kids out of the fire, uh, she went and she hauled pieces of furniture out
Holy
of the
cow.
fire, and it was just the most unbelievable act of heroism I've ever seen or read about in my life. And I'm a retired firefighter, EMT. I've seen heroism, and the story just struck me so hard that it had to be the first story in the next book.
Wow.
And the girls did not survive. The
Oh.
boy did, and it was a sensation in the newspapers for a couple weeks. And but then the material kind of goes dead, and I had at the very last minute was trying to verify if the boy had actually survived, because I had run across an obituary of a 80-year-old man who had the same name and the same area, and was heavily scarred from a fire, and was able to determine that he had actually survived the fire. So uh, 3 of the 4 died as a result of the burns. And back then, there was simply nothing that could be done for the pain besides morphine. And the it's just a compelling story.
Wow.
And so everything in there is not a feel good story. History is not about feel good. History about is what happened. And that's one of my pet peeves, is how many people try to revise history today and try to portray it according to our standards today, and try to change it to fit their political beliefs. History is what it is. You don't change the facts. And so that's the way I try to write each story. And there's a lot of we've got a lot of talent that has come out of Kansas over the years. If you go to Hollywood, you would not have a lot of big major stars if you did not have Kansas. It's amazing how many stars came out of Kansas. And one of the most interesting stories is Fatty Arbuckle. And he was born in Kansas, was abused as a child, and he ended up being the first millionaire in Hollywood, the first actor to actually become a millionaire. But there was also so much controversy surrounding him that he was banned from Hollywood. It was a time of uh, activism on a lot of different people's parts. There was uh, person who was known to be a criminal that tried to take advantage of every situation that created and happened to have a politician, a district attorney who had political ambitions at the time. And so we have lost a lot of his work. He was very innovative. He discovered Bob Hope. We
Fatty
may
Arbuckle
not,
did.
huh?
Fatty Arbuckle did?
Fat Arbuckle did.
Did not know that.
Yeah. He's the one that discovered Bob Hope, and we may not have ever had him had it not been for our Fatty Arbuckle. And he was demonized by an awful lot of people. And when you dig through the story deeply, there was a awful lot of hate that was thrown at him, and nobody ever took time to really correct the record. The things have not. You think things are politically charged today? Things have always been politically charged,
Yeah,
and
that's nothing new. It goes all the way back to Jefferson and Adams.
that's right. That's right. And as well as the media, they haven't improved one bit all through those years, and they drive narratives that suit them and not necessarily what is the truth. So, but it's a very fascinating story, and he was quite a guy, and it finally just got to be too much for him. And as he was just trying to reclaim his place in Hollywood, he died of a heart attack. But it was his lifestyle did not help him one darn bit, and so. But those are the kind of stories that I'm finding more and more celebrities that come out of Kansas that I could probably do a book just on actors and entertainers. And in my next book, you will find a story about Rory Feek of Joey and Rory. He's a Kansas boy, and anybody that's in watches RFD TV is very familiar with Joey and Rory, and anybody that's into Western country and what they call roots music, Joe or Rory wrote some pretty big songs that have done very well for a lot of today's modern country singers. So, but he's a Kansas boy,
Yep.
and I've got his story in the next book coming out.
Awesome. Well, I have to let you go because we are starting to exceed our time here. But if people want to get in touch with you, they can look you up on Facebook. But you also have a website. And I'll put this on the hot link on the video, so don't worry about writing it down, anybody. It's RR Ringer. It's R Ringer. Sorry, KSOddities.com. So rringerksoddities.com. We'll put that on the video so that people can look for you, or they can look for you on Facebook. Thank you so much, Roger, for coming on.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching, and keep an eye out because we will keep on doing these at least as long as everybody's shut down through the virus. Thank you, and have a great day.
Bye.